And we have with us today Gerald Celente. Buongiorno, my friend.
Buongiorno, how are you?
I am doing a little bit better. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
Yeah, we had a decoupling. I wanted you to talk about this today. Something happened in Europe that might trigger some derivatives. Somebody's unplugging from the European currency. Would that be Sweden by any chance?
Well, I didn't know that happened today. I know that Switzerland knocked the peg from the euro off that they had in place since 2011. But I didn't know that somebody dropped out. Sweden I don't believe was ever in the euro. They have their own currency. They're in the eurozone, of course, in the EU, but they have their own currency. So I'm not familiar with if one of the countries dropped out yet. I don't believe so.
Yeah. Well, what I know on this, and this caused the stock market to panic a little bit, and the Swiss National Bank, the SNB, it decoupled from the euro, and that triggered billions of dollars worth of losses all over the place, all over the globe. Citigroup and Deutsche Bank both say their losses were somewhere in the neighborhood of $150 million.
Yeah, that's the Swiss.
Okay.
Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah.
That's what I mean. The Swiss were coupled to the euro in terms that they were pegging the Swiss franc to the euro.
My mistake. Not Sweden, Switzerland.
No. Yeah, they were pegging it to it. So, as a matter of fact, I'm very familiar with it because I used to have Swiss francs, and then one day I woke up and I was doing very well with them. I had been buying them for years, and then all of a sudden they pegged it to the euro at 120, and that was the end of that play.
Well,
So now what they've done is, because the euro is declining so rapidly, and we're about 115 euros to a dollar. And by the way, I was in Rome, actually I was in Verona, when the euro came on officially as a currency in 2002, and it was trading at 85 cents to a dollar. So what's happening is that on Thursday, the European Central Bank, Mario Draghi, former Goldman Sachs guy, of course, they're going to announce some more quantitative easing, and it's going to hit the euro. And so the Swiss, they just exited right out of there, and with the whole understanding, by the way, that this whole central bank, one of the top trends we have in 2015, and they're available for anyone that wants them at our website, trendsjournal.com, and also they could purchase our 5.5-hour conference that we had here on the trends of the coming year. And one of them is called bankism. And the central banks are in control. It's a takeover. It's not capitalism. And so what you're seeing is the manipulation worldwide by the central banks. Not only, and we're talking about Swiss, we're also talking about the Chinese. Chinese are dumping like $20 trillion. Their balance sheets blew up since they joined the World Trade Organization in 2001. Just 2 weeks after 9/11, when no one was watching, our friends, the Communist Chinese. And then, of course, you also have, as I mentioned, the European Central Bank and our central bank. So they haven't raised rates in this country now since 2006. So what we're looking at with the Swiss, it's do or die for them, because they kept having to buy up euros and sell Swiss francs to keep that peg going, and they couldn't do it anymore. And they're bailing out because they see the future. And the future is a devalued euro, a devalued dollar. The only reason the dollar's staying high is because the other currencies are so weak. And it's mayhem around the world. And that's you see what's going on over in Brazil. They just announced, remember, the place is into a recession. Anybody that's been to Brazil knows there are a lot of poor people there. They're raising taxes on fuel and necessities. So it's again, it's shaft the little people. So the whole thing is out of control. And by the way, what's going on with oil prices, everybody should really look at this without putting a conspiracy theory aspect into it. It's very simple. It's supply and demand. And demand is way off. I've been mentioning China. China just had its slowest growth rate since 2009. And they missed their mark on what the growth was going to be. They need 7.7%, 7.5, 7.7% just to stay even. And they're down 7.3, 7.4, and those numbers are cooked as well. So when you look at oil prices, you have to look at copper prices. You have to look at, which are at 5.5-year lows. You have to look at iron ore. You have to look at all of the commodities. They're all way down. So this is going to be it's a signal that the global economy is in collapse.
Well, and there are some side benefits. I did a story the other day that this is going to, Saudi Arabia is not going to reduce production. They're going to allow this to continue. Now, before the big oil reduction, we were bouncing around $110, $120 a barrel, and now we're down below, I think, 46 or 45. I've not checked the price today. But they pretty much admitted that in 2015 they're going to take about $750 billion hit, but they're not going to curtail production to make up for the lost revenue. And
no, because what happens is also they have a big nut to crack. You know, people forget that when that so-called Arab Spring erupted, one of the ways the kingdom over there, I mean, I wonder how many beheadings they had today, our friends over there, they had a revolution on their hands. They're dumping tons of dough into the system to keep the people quiet. So it's like if anybody in business, it's 70% off. You can't get rid of the stuff. So you get any price you can. And that's what's going on here. And they don't have the power they used to have, because what they're concerned about is if they cut production, the other people are just going to keep flowing this stuff out there, and they're right.
Right. Well,
it's not. I was in D.C., by the way, in 1973. I used to be a government affairs specialist for the chemical industry, and I was there when the embargo hit, and these guys were going crazy. And my boss said to me, sending me to all these meetings, and I kept coming back, and I said, there's nothing that they can do. Nothing's going to happen until they end the embargo, period, paragraph. So all of these meetings are a waste of time. And that was a different time back then. Now you have massive production going on. They didn't have tar sands back then. They didn't have hydrofracking. They didn't have offshore drilling at the depths that they have now. So even if Saudi Arabia cuts back, is Russia going to cut back? Is Venezuela going to cut back? Venezuela, by the way, needs oil. West Texas today closed at 46.64, Brent 48.22. They need Brent to close at, they needed to trade at $115 a barrel just to cover their debt, just to stay even. And the numbers coming out of Saudi Arabia, people are saying $5. That's a lot of baloney from what I'm reading, and I read a lot, and it's more in the $40 range.
And I think that's where it's going to stabilize. But they've come out and said that, well, look, I mean, if it drops even further, that's no big deal. But there's some other aspects to this that is hard on the competition. You mentioned one of them. Here in this country, we've got the hydrofracking, and people have invested all that money. And as long as the oil stayed high, they could invest the money. They could go do the fracking. Well, a lot of these places are closing their doors. A lot of them are going belly up, and there was like $200 billion of investment money on the table that is not going to be able to recoup and not be able to pay back, and they're going to close shop.
Yeah, you're right. It's estimated that of the about $1.5 trillion in junk bonds, depending on whose numbers you're looking at, between 15 and 20% are in energy of that 1.5 trillion of junk bonds. So, so, by the way, one of the ways I made my name as a trend forecaster was when the Wall Street Journal covered it. I forecast the crash of 1987. And one of the reasons I did it was that oil prices were crashing in 86. So this is a canary in the mine shaft. It's in front of everybody's eyes. But again, there people who I believe are reading too much into it. It's to hurt Putin, this or that. No, it's hurting, like you just said. Whether you're down in Texas or in Venezuela, or whether you're in Brazil or Norway. It's knocking everybody out. Matter of fact, in the North Sea over there, in Scotland, they want the government to get rid of the taxes because they can't produce it at the price level it is now, and make any money. So this is global, but again, you're looking at, you could, as I've mentioned, iron ore, for example. You could buy a ton of reinforcement rod in China, rebar, cheaper than you could buy a ton of cabbage. That economy has collapsed over there. The housing market has failed. The Shanghai index closed down Monday 8% because it's a casino, and the government's trying to rein it in. The government, as I mentioned, the central bank in China is just pumping money in there trying to keep this thing going. And by the way, one of our trends for 2014 was China boom towns around the world, right. And that's what's going on. Smart money's left China, and they're buying up the world.
Now they're ghost towns. Yeah, now they're moving into economies. They've figured out over there that, wait a minute, this is a dead-end street, and we're not going to throw away any more yuans, so let's take the money and go invest it in other economies that are still surviving.
And exactly, right where I am up here in upstate New York, in Kingston, New York, the old Borscht Belt area, the Catskills, they're buying up a whole town. They're actually building a whole town, a Chinese town, and they're buying them. This land is very cheap. The Borscht Belt had at one time over 1,000 hotels, and now it's a lot of places of virtual ghost towns.
Now,
so they're buying up beautiful land for pennies on the dollar. And they're buying up the top-notch hotels as well, like the Waldorf Astoria for $2 billion. Remember that one?
Yeah. And do you think, Gerald, they're coming in here, setting up shop, buying their own towns, to come here and assimilate to our culture? Or are they just setting up shop to make it more comfortable, put themselves in a little bubble that they're pretty used to seeing, and just here to make money?
I would say more of what you just said. I have a friend of mine that's Swiss, and when the Chinese, he said, go there, he said they stay, among themselves. They don't, as tourists. They don't go into the regular restaurants, or they're very restricted in what they do. So when you see the kind of towns that they build, and again, it was it's what nationalities have done it all the time. You had little Italies, you had one after another. So I believe that the assimilation process will eventually come, but I believe it'll be a lot slower because we have more of a Western culture than an Eastern culture.
For right
now,
now,
of course, now we have a Southern culture, a south of the border culture.
Yeah, for right now.
No,
yeah.
So, but even so, they're. I think initially it's going to be their bubble, and that's why I'm saying they're building this whole town that's going to be their town.
Well, let me see. I just had a little technical problem here, and I'm trying to straighten around. I lost my train of thought. Okay, where are we going here in this year? Now, you mentioned that the European Central Bank is going to do a little bit more easing over there. Here we called it quantitative easing. Over there they called it something else. What is the business world? I mean, is there anybody paying attention, Gerald, to what this is going to do, what's left of the currencies? Devaluing the currencies even more.
That's why you're seeing gold prices go back up. I mean, the smart people know the game, and the smart people knew it from the beginning, that this Ponzi scheme could only last for so long. The central banks are central fraudsters. As I mentioned, interest rates haven't risen since, 2006. The average person can't put money in the bank and get any return on it anymore. The only people that have been enriched are the very rich, and I'm not making that up. I'm sure you saw the study that came out yesterday about Oxfam, saying that 1% of the people own 99% of the world's assets by next year. 85 people in the world have more dough than 3.5 billion. The Pew Research Center came out with a study 2 weeks ago. The gap between the rich and the poor in the United States is at levels worse than it was during the era of the robber barons. And difference now with the robber barons back then, the robber barons were actually putting people to work. They were building things, railroads, steel. They were making things.
Well, they were monopolists, and as long as they were the only game in town and you needed a job, you could go to work for them. You couldn't go to work for the competition because there was none. But that,
again,
as you said,
yeah. They're robber barons, but what you have now is a whole different breed. They're hedge funds. They're private equity groups. They're investment capitalists. All they're doing is making money for themselves and not creating anything. They're the George Soroses of the world. All they're doing is making money for themselves. So unlike the robber barons that were building America, this is a whole different game. And then, of course, people like Teddy Roosevelt and others put in regulations such as Glass-Steagall came later, the Robeson-Patman Act, Sherman Antitrust Act, Clayton Antitrust Act, to level the playing field so that they could monopolize. And then, of course, our Republican and Democratic politicians sold us out and put the nail in the coffin of all of those acts.
The future, I'm starting to see the housing bubble starting to reignite in this country, if folks can believe that. Gerald, is there any bright spots for 2015?
The only bright spot is that it's an opportunity for people that care to really do something to change the course. A new study came out, a Wall Street Journal NBC poll. It showed that only 16% of the population in this country have a favorable rating of Congress. Tonight, the Commander-in-Chief is going to give his State of the Union address. It's going to be empty words and a bunch of trained SEALs jumping up and down and clapping at each cheap line. The opportunity's never been better. When the vacuum is this big, it can be filled with anything. And right now, to me, it's ready to be filled with greatness, morality, integrity, reinstitution of what made this country great. I mean, I know the atrocities, the genocide and other things committed against the Native Americans, but we also had a Constitution, a Declaration of Independence, and a Bill of Rights that was the envy of the world. And so right now, the opportunity, with the elections coming up in 2016, and with the markets ready to collapse in 2015, I think the opportunity for a new third party is great. And I think it's the opportunity for everybody to speak out and do something positive in their own individual lives that are going to change in the lives outside.
Gerald,
that, to me, is the only way I see the change coming.
Yeah,
but I never saw a better opportunity than now.
Gerald, I don't want to rain on anybody's parade about any elections coming up in D.C. or anything else, but effectively, as people have told me, that that's a moot point. The Fed is gone. I mean, it's gone over the high side. There's no pulling that back, reining it in. The protections we're going to have is at the state level. But that's going to mean that the states are going to have to stand up and demand that the government, the federal government, follow the Constitution. But in many instances, the states themselves are in as much violation of the Constitution as the Fed.
Well, I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. And I'm saying I believe it can be changed. I believe the opportunity for a third party is ripe. And who's excited about getting a Bush or a Clinton? Nobody. Except the people in their family and the people that work for them.
I don't know if the Gambinis and the Genoveses are going to let a third party play on their poker game.
I think it's out of their control, just like it's happening all over Europe. Whether it's UKIP in the UK, the Podemos party in Spain came out of nowhere. And now they could win they could be elected prime minister. You're seeing it in country after country, and there's another tool where they don't have all the control of as we speak, and that's the internet. So we may see that kind of thing could make a candidate happen. Again, the discontent is so deep that it can be filled now with something much greater, and that's what we're looking at. We know the problems, and we're looking for some solutions.
Well, one of the solutions that we can bring about, and the states can demand this, to stop dealing with their funny money dollar. And Gerald, until the day if I drop dead in the next 30 seconds, these words will be on my lips. If we can get rid of the fiat funny money international bankster gangsters and their Guidos operating inside this country, we might have a chance of restoring this country. But under the current circumstance, we can throw whatever political stuff we want to throw in there. It's not going to change anything.
Oh, I agree. And it goes back to the Federal Reserve. You know, you've heard me say this before. 6 words have killed America: Harvard, Princeton, Yale, bullets, bombs, and banks.
Yep.
And the Princeton guy was Woodrow Wilson, president of Princeton, took us into a World War I, totally unnecessary war. The war was almost over, got all our guys killed, gave us the income tax, federal income tax, and the Federal Reserve. So if he can do it, you can do it, I can do it, we can do it. These people aren't gods. Matter of fact, I would say that God's not smiling on a man that sends people to war for reasons that, you know, we're not good enough to involve us into. But again, you'll keep looking at one after another. I was reading some quotes that I had printed out from the past on different statements that people made. Here's one from Bloomberg. It was on Bloomberg on July 3rd, 2008. And I am proud of the decision of this administration to overthrow Saddam Hussein. The Iraq War has been tougher than any of us really dreamed. Condoleezza Rice. You're proud, and the arrogance tougher than any of us ever dreamed. Not tougher than I really dreamed. I wrote an op-ed piece that was in newspapers around the country 3 weeks before the war started, that the United States would have a swift battlefield victory, Saddam Hussein would be overthrown, and it would devolve into a civil war.
And that's exactly what's happened now. Instead of pulling out of the Middle East, instead of pulling out of Afghanistan after 13 years, we're still going to have troops there to guard the poppy plants. We have a new boogeyman that's the super duper on steroids, Al-Qaeda. We now call them ISIS, and, well, they've taken over half of Syria and half of this and half of that, and we've got to go bomb the crap out of them. In the meantime, worldwide, they're turning up the temperature that these terrorists are threatening the entire sanctity of the entire world.
I know.
And I would have one solution to this. If you don't want to raise the ire of the tiger, quit sticking a stick in his eye.
Of course. Yeah, we have no business being there. We would be called insurgents and militants if the Iraqis were attacking us in America and we were fighting back. I mean, it's as simple as that. The American press calls anybody in Afghanistan or Iraq that are fighting foreigners, occupying their countries, militants, terrorists, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, Taliban, and never patriots.
Amazing. We are out of time in this segment. Trends Research, Gerald Celente's Trends Journal. I appreciate you coming on today. One of these months I'm going to snag you for more than a half hour at a time, because just when we get warmed up, you got to take off.
All right, man. Thanks a lot. All the best to you.
Okay, you too, sir, and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you.
All righty.
We need leaders who lead us, not stick us and bleed us, who take all our money and send it abroad. We must take America back. We need fairer schools and more things. must take America back. We must take America back.
With fire. With fire. With fire. With fire. With fire. With fire.